Okay, welcome everyone. Keep streaming on in. Welcome to the fall meeting of DREIA. We're assembled here. We'll get going in just a few minutes as soon as we get people landed. I want to thank our business members again for sponsoring the meeting. A couple of them are out, but a few more will join us soon. We hope you're comfortable. And thank you very much for always responding to our emails. Be sure to like us on Facebook. I know a lot of you sign up through Facebook and we appreciate that. Dave, you had your Facebook going for us tonight too, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I didn't, I have somebody does that for me. One of my daughters does that. A 9-year-old, my granddaughter. But we put it up. She told me we put it up, so we'll see. You never know.
Very good.
I have some commentary on Facebook in here tonight in my presentation, because I think yesterday, I think it was yesterday, it may have been today, I got into a stream of comments on being able to wholesaling in North Carolina is what it is. You'll see it. But I was astonished at how uninformed most of the commentary is and how misleading a lot of it was. And trolls that come out of the woodwork. These guys must have nothing better to do with their time. It's a simple question with a simple answer. And I had people coming on there that sounded like attorneys that were saying you have to do this and that, 5 things. Otherwise, you can't wholesale in North Carolina. Before we started, I was telling Viju that of the 40 states that I fund in, the first and most active by far is Georgia. Number 2 is North Carolina. 3 is Texas, and then probably 4 or 5 is actually Florida. So as much as we think we're doing a lot of deals, there are states doing a lot more deals. So
yeah, I think too also, Dave, probably there's a lot more cash floating around Florida than other places as well. I mean, there's still lots of deals going on here.
There's always plenty of deals if you work on getting deals. If you complain and gripe about there's no deals, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally agree.
The first thing I'm going to go over is one of the students, what he does specifically, which is old school, but it doesn't do badly for him. So you'll see.
Okay. Well, again, welcome. This is Dade Real Estate Investors Association. I'm Jim Pamplin, and I'm with co-chair Viju Katungal, along with our business members who Viju is going to introduce just now.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's a late evening. I'm going to start with Erica.
Hi, thank you for having me today. My name is Erica with Creative Title Services. I've been doing title for 29 years. We do short sales, we do flips, we do first and seconds, we work along trust. Anything that an investor needs, our office can handle. We're also available 24/7. With that being said, any text or email you send, you will have a response within 4 to 8 hours after hours. My number is 305-476-8733. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Erica. And you can always find Erica's information at DREIA.com.
Francisco.
Good evening, guys. How are you? Nice seeing so many people today. My name is Francisco Mago. I'm with DREIAFacts.com. And what we do basically is we find you deals. We provide information like foreclosures, probates, open violations, anything under public record that we can actually find for you to find you deals. We actually doing it at the moment. I'm announcing today that as of tomorrow, we're going to be opening a couple of new states. That will be the state of Georgia and the state of Arizona. So if you already have DREIA Facts, please review on your states option, and you're going to be able to see those new states if you actually have the all states feature. So thank you very much and have a wonderful evening.
Who?
I think it's you.
Oh, me. Hi, I'm Jim Santiago from Independent Title, the second title company here. We're here to help investors get their real estate closings done. Once you found the deals with REIA, once Dave's taught you what to take care of, Viju's coached you through getting them wrapped up, and Jim's figured out all the money, you need somebody to close your deal. So we're here to help you get your closings done, like 1, 2, 3. And we're here to help you with your double closings, assignments, REOs, resales, short sales, anything you need, we can help you out with the real estate industry. We've been around for about 42 years, and we've been handling we've been investor oriented for about 15 years now. So I'm Jim from Independent Title. We're Florida's best title company, and you get that Santiago satisfaction. If you scan my QR code, you get a text, and we'll send you over a link to our website. I'm also going to put it in the chat for everybody. If you have any questions, just let me know.
Thank you, Jim. And if you go to, I'm going to put the vendor list because we have a lot more vendors. They didn't get to come on today. So I'll put it on the list on the chat so you can contact them if you need them. Jim, it's all yours.
All right, again, welcome and
Quick, let me cut in real quick, sorry. I would say go to our website for properties, but I'm selling them as they come in. So if you need properties, send us an email.
Yep, send an email or call Viju, and he'll call you back. So I'll answer the question a lot of people get. Viju and I have arranged the Miami Shores Country Club for January 19th. So you guys are the first to know. We hope to see you there in person. Remember, it'll be dark, but we're going to get started. It's going to be sort of a New Year's party, all kinds of things going on. We're going to have at least 3 speakers. Dave will be there. And someone from the Miami Association of Realtors. We're going to have a lot of good data, a lot of good information. And more than that, a whole lot of fun. I have no idea. You never know what the vendor's going to do and what kind of entertainment they're going to provide. So we look forward to seeing you there. Watch your emails and watch Facebook for our announcement about our meeting, January 19th, 2022.
Mark your calendar, please.
Yeah, mark your calendar because it's going to be very important.
Wait.
Yeah, I know a lot of people keep telling me they can't wait. So you'll see a lot of familiar faces. Masked or not, you'll still recognize them. It doesn't matter.
And Dave is going to be there, right, Dave?
Yeah.
My plans are to be there. Barring anything happening, that's my plans.
All right. Well, look, we've talked about Zillow. We're Zillowed out. We're ready to talk about getting back to basics and why. And Dave's just going to answer the question: is real estate a thing of the past? Real estate investing a thing of the past? So, Dave, are you about ready to let her rip?
I am. Let me start out by saying that in the course of the time I've been with DREIA since 2013, both Jim and Viju have always left me alone to do whatever content I want to produce. That's worked out well for me, and I don't think they've ever had too many eye-raising situations. Tonight I'm going to do a triple header, which means I'm going to cover both that topic as well as 2 others, but I put it into a video format to condense it down and make it just make it easier on everybody. And I just finished it, so I haven't actually reviewed the whole video. So we're going to see this together. So what I'm going to try and do now is I'm going to try and share my screen. And I'm going to share sound also, because the last time we did this, I didn't do it properly. So let me try this. So here we go, guys. Hold on to your seat.
Tonight we're going to have what I call a triple header. And the reason is the first thing I'm going to talk about is a couple of recent deals, so you can get an idea of where the market is gone or is headed perhaps. Again, specifically talk about where is the market going and what to expect, especially for next year. And finally, back to the basics to survive. A lot of people are struggling because they're unable to find deals, and I want to talk about, are the basics still viable, or do you need to go back to the basics and make them work for you? So the first thing I want to show you is this is one of our students. He calls me up as soon as he gets a deal, which means typically it's about once every month or 2. In this case, he called me and said, I've gotten the biggest deal I've ever gotten. It's $57,000 net profit. I actually did a short video with him discussing that exact situation. During the video, he talked to me about his only source of deal is, of course, door knocking. He joined the mentoring program, was uncomfortable making calls to realtors. He got frustrated with them and just said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go back to something that I know and understand. And in the video, he talks about how he is able to engage people in such a way that they go with him versus other investors who have oftentimes actually offered more money for the property. While we were talking, he said to me, by the way, in the next 2 weeks, he's going to have a $48,000 net profit coming up. So in this 1 month time span, he will go over $100,000, which is one of the goals we have for students, is to try and do $100,000 months. We'd like to have them back to back for you, but you have to get there. You have to start out the first step of the journey. One of the reasons I interviewed him that was important to me is when he called me with the last deal, the $57,000 profit. As we talked, he said to me, do you remember that I sold my house to come into your program? And I said, no, I didn't know that. Because had I known that, I would not have accepted him into the program. He said, yeah, I could have been homeless, but I wanted to be in the program so much that I sold my house, used the money to get into the program. And that's what I call a commitment. He was at a stage where there was no option B. Too oftentimes, students come into the program, they don't have an option B, but they spend more time figuring out what their option B is going to be, and they take lesser of what they could be rather than sticking to the program and doing what they need to do. So again, what I think the other thing that's unusual about him besides his commitment level is the only source of deals that he has is door knocking. And he discusses that specifically in the video, which I'll have up on my site probably in the next day or so. The other thing I want to talk about is a hybridism example. This closed just the day before yesterday. This is the typical HUD statement that I show you. For you people that aren't familiar with what I call hybridism, it's very simply a listing agent becomes a double hatter, so to speak. He wears a hat of trying to get the listing if the house is in good shape. If it's not, or there's a time frame where the house has to be sold because of pending litigation or convenience or whatever else, he then has the ability as a wholesaler to purchase it for cash. So this is going to be a no money wholesale transaction. What I've always done is I've cut the A to B and B to C HUDs in half so you can actually see them. And in this case, you can see the purchase price is $250,000. That's the top half of the A to B HUD. A to B is the original seller selling to the investor B. In a moment, we're going to see where he resells it. This is the bottom half of the A to B HUD. There's two important parts on this. The fact that he has no earnest money deposit. We go through this on a regular basis where how can you put up no earnest money deposit? There's actually a couple of different ways. We're not going to get into them here. The other important part is this is the amount of money that he needed to close this transaction, $259,318.75. As a transactional funder, I loaned him that money to do the transaction. Now this is the B to C HUD. And as you can see, he sold the property for $400,000. I'm going to talk about trends in the wholesale market, one of which is larger profits. This is the top half. Here's the bottom half. As you'll notice, the end buyer put up a $10,000 earnest money deposit. I stress it all the time, make sure your end buyer is putting up a larger earnest money deposit than you put up in the event he doesn't close and you claim his earnest money deposit. You can still make money on the transaction even if you lose your earnest money deposit and can't purchase it at all. This is the funding that I received back, $261,000 and change. But the bottom line is right here. His net profit is $135,283.91. Now, at the last meeting, we discussed a new mentor student whose first deal was, I believe, $137,000 net profit. That's not this deal. That's a different mentor student, different profit, different deal. This is a same day double closing, no money transaction. And it's a hybrid transaction. Again, I looked at the second page of the A to B and the B to C HUD, which I don't have on here, just to check and see if there was an additional commission paid to this investor or not. And in fact, there was not an additional commission paid. So all he took on this was the wholesale profit of $135,000. That didn't mean he couldn't have taken commissions on either legs. He just chose not to. So what's the market looking like? And this is kind of important because you get to hear a lot of things. A lot of them are, I'm going to say, urban legends. Most of them are excuses for people not doing deals. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Since January 1 of this year to date, I've done more closings than I did in the previous 2 years. 2020 was a busy year. 2019 was a very busy year. So I have now surpassed both those years between the beginning of this year and now. Why? Because the people who are making offers and doing deals don't care about the rhetoric about I can't get any deals. Everybody tells me there's no deals. Everything sells above list. And the wholesale profits in general, the no money transactions that I see for students and investors are larger than I've ever seen on a consistent basis. I say $35,000 to $1 million. I have a closing tomorrow where the investor is going to pay $798,000 and he has it resold same day, double closing, no money transaction for $1.8 million. It will be a few dollars less because of closing costs, a $1 million profit. Now, where are those? They're out there and you just have to keep searching for them, and perhaps harder than you did before if you didn't do it. But whatever it takes, if you're not making offers, you're not going to get deals. So as I say, investors are having to work harder for the deals they're getting, but again, profits are larger. Now, if you say to me, Dave, I'm getting deals and I'm not getting larger profits, that's your fault. And it's your fault because you're offering too much just to get the deal under contract. You're doing assignments most likely instead of double closings. And the other thing is your buyer's list simply isn't strong enough to get you more bidding on the properties. There's fewer and fewer new virtual wholesalers. And I say fewer and fewer because the ones that try it, their success rate is extremely low. How do I know that? Because I'm funding those deals as a transactional funder, and I can see how many of those fail and how many of the wholesalers fail. Now, I have to say that a basic trend that I've seen more than I've ever seen before is new investors are being targeted by seasoned wholesalers to take their deals. Seasoned wholesalers are pros at negotiation. I have a closing coming up in the next 2 days where the original purchase price was $90,000. The new investor sold it for $120,000, and by the time he gets to closing in the next 2 days, he's going to be accepting a $94,000 offer from the same investor that signed a contract for $120,000. How did they do that? The professional wholesaler just kept saying no and asking for discounts. As he got closer and closer to closing, the new investor doesn't have a big buyer's list, therefore he has to take whatever he can get to be able to even get his earnest money deposit back. And by the way, the property he purchased was listed at $68,000. He went in and said to the listing agent, what do you think it's going to take? What should I offer? And the listing agent said, very simply, it's a highly competitive transaction. If you don't offer $90,000, you're not going to get it. So he said, okay, I'll offer $90,000. He instantly got it. And when he tried to get out of the transaction because he realized he had way overpaid, the agent said to him, there's no buyers. We didn't have anybody that offered at 68. So did she lie? Gee whiz, I don't think agents can lie, but this one did. So he way overpaid for it to begin with, and now that he's trying to get out of it, he realizes he's going to be lucky to get his earnest money deposit back. I see more and more quitclaim deed properties coming up for sale. You have to be careful because when you accept a quitclaim deed for transfer of the title, you also accept all of the stuff that's stuck to that property. And if it's a bad chain of title, in other words, back 2 or 3 sellers, there should have been a probate or any number of things, you're going to lose your entire investment. And if you say to me, well, Dave, I'll just go get a quiet title motion, it's not that simple. It's not that simple if it's not at a tax deed sale or foreclosure sale. I see a lot of institutional buyers that were consistently buying, they're slowing down or dropping out. If you find a buyer and it's an institutional buyer and you ask them the question, can you close on the same day I'm closing? And they say, no, we can't. And by the way, we'll only close with our closing agent. Now you have a problem because you have a delayed second closing. That's called extended transactional funding. Almost all of the transactional funders that I know stopped doing that years ago. And the reason being is if the end buyer doesn't close, they have to foreclose to get their money back. The institutional buyers do not buy great deals. They buy properties at almost whatever cost they can get away with paying because the mindset is not that of an investor. The mindset of that is an institutional money manager who gets paid for placing money. What they do with that, they lipstick it and rent it, or they rehab it and put it out retail. And if you've been following Zillow at all, you'll find out very quickly our business model doesn't work very well in a stagnant or declining market. That's what Zillow has been the canary in the coal mine for. The market has gone more or less flat. Now, when you tell that to people, they use examples of, well, gee whiz, I had a property I couldn't sell for $800,000 and I put it back on the market. I got $1.3 million with a cash buyer. Just because somebody has $1.3 million cash doesn't mean they're the smartest apple on the tree. And thank goodness you did that. That doesn't matter to us as investors. That's not what we do. Those are not the type of properties that we're purchasing and reselling to make a profit on. Black hat wholesalers are getting more and more bold, I should say, aggressive, especially where probates are involved. They're going to come after your seller, and your only recourse is either learning how to file properly and legally a notice of interest, affidavit of interest, memorandum of interest, simply an affidavit, whatever you call it. In Florida, they're unacceptable to be recorded in the public record. That doesn't mean they're not being recorded. The key is, if you have to defend it in court, have you done it properly? And it's not as simple as filling out the form properly and simply going down and recording it. More and more attorneys who used to just send in a notice of interest through their electronic filing system are not doing it. They don't want to be associated with the notice of interest. I did a video on this, so if in fact you're thinking about it, try and find my video. It's online. And it goes into detail about how to legalize your notice of interest so that if you have to defend it, you'll be able to and come out ahead. So many deals are coming from longer and longer follow-ups. I talked to a student yesterday who was very nice in calling and asking how Nan and I were doing. I asked how she was doing in her business, and she said she just got a deal that she originally made an offer on months ago. And the seller said, I talked to my cousin, the realtor, and she said she can get $320,000 for it. Your offer's $100,000 below that. I'm going to list it. So the student, followed up and he said, I'm getting tons of offers, but the offers are at $200,000. So ultimately he came back to her and said, if I'm going to be selling it at this level, I want you to have it because you were very courteous, nice, and you didn't push me. Now, does that pushiness always work? Depends on how motivated the seller is. If they have a deadline for a tax deed sale next Thursday, it's going to have to work because otherwise a lot's going to happen about their losing the house, possibly becoming homeless, so on and so forth. And oftentimes I see follow-ups coming back that were months and months ago and sometimes years ago. One of my students still comes to me today and every once in a while will say, I got that property I told you about back when. I said, back when? 2019. 2019. The longest one she's had is 3 years. Now, how often do you follow up? If you're making offers and deals are coming back in 2 or 3 years, you could have thousands in your pipeline. It's not so. Those properties are either going to sell or something's going to happen to them. And by the way, the follow-ups typically are the largest profits. Hedge funds are becoming trickier about how and when they will close as end buyers. Originally, they said same day. Before that, they would take assignment of contracts. Then they went to can't do same day anymore. We have to do 2 days. In other words, you have to be on title for 2 days. Then it became a week. You have to be on title. Now, if you hear that happen, you found a buyer, it's a hedge fund, and they say, yeah, we want it, but you're going to have to sign our contract, use our closing agent on the second leg, the B2C leg. And by the way, we can't close on the day you want to close. We have to close a week later because of title issues. There is no title issues. They're doing that, and what they're actually saying, if you have the money to close, go ahead and do it. But if you don't have the money to close, we now know who the seller is. And a simple postcard in the mail to that seller will make them into a black hatter and get the deal without you. And frankly, for less money than they would have to pay originally. So do I know they're doing that? No. I can't say to you I've seen it because I'm not looking for it. But I just had it come up, and I said to the investor that came to me and said, I need 1 week as extended transactional funding. I got it for $325. I've sold it to them for $350. That's not a big spread on a $300,000 property, especially after closing costs. And he overpaid for it. And the only buyer was the hedge fund. So he said to me, can you do extended? And I said, I won't do extended funding. So I said, here's the deal. Go back to them and say, will you close on the same day if I close the A to B transaction with you? And they said, hadn't thought about that. We normally rerun the title work to do the second closing. But in fact, if you're going to close with our closing agent, we don't have to rerun the title work. So that's a way to get around it. Now, what did he have to do? He had to go back to his title agent, the person that he loved and closed with a lot, and say, frankly, to her, can't do it. Otherwise, he doesn't have the money to close and no one will lend it to him, other than perhaps friends or family members. There's seemingly a rising tide of pre-foreclosures. Now, you hear that all the time, but I'm actually on the ground, so to speak, and seeing it happen. We've had a wave of new buying, new housing, new everything because of the lowest interest rates on mortgages ever. So how's that work out? It works out great until one family member loses their job and the income's cut in half or less. So what's going to happen to these houses? I'm already seeing them come to market, and it doesn't matter to the lender what the condition of the property is. They're trying to get full market value, and those properties aren't selling. And I think what's going to happen on the pre-foreclosures is interest rates are going to stay low, and most likely until after the election in 2022. And then a lot of stuff is going to hit the fan. That doesn't mean wait until 2022 and then see what happens. You should be making offers every day if you're serious about making this a business. Short sales are being slowed down so lenders can better judge what's happening in the market. Why are they slowing down? It's because they're wanting to see what's happening. They can always do the short sale. When a person is 90 days late on their mortgage, unbeknownst to most people, a lender sends out an appraiser, or at least gets a BPO, and they know what their equity is in the property if there is any, and they have a loss limit on what price they're willing to take. Now, they can't see the condition of the property and whether there's leaks in the roof and stuff like that unless there's a blue tarp. But they have a pretty good idea where they're going well before you come along as an investor to do a short sale. And if you're going to start doing short sales, don't try to do them yourself. Get somebody that does it as a professional. Yes, you'll have to pay them, but it's well worth it for two reasons. First of all, if they understand to work for an investor price, they'll probably get you a better price than you could have gotten. Secondly, they'll get the deal done, and you won't have to spend 30, 60, or 90 days to get an answer. I said here, expect many more opportunities in 2022. I say that because we're in a huge upheaval in everything happening, and you see it. Our society is more opposed and diverse. A lot of things are going on, and a lot more things will happen. But the one truism in real estate investing is it's a renewable resource. There's always going to be foreclosures, divorces, bankruptcies, tax deed sales. Whatever can happen will happen. Unfortunately, the over 750,000 people that died from COVID have relationships in the real estate market in many ways, shapes, and forms. And those will start working themselves out next year. So I'm not being a Gould and say start taking advantage of people's homes that passed away. I'm just saying to you that somebody is going to have to buy those homes from sellers. And the probate market still is one of the largest sources of profits. Yesterday I saw a Facebook exchange about transactional funding. Fully 2/3 of the comment from experienced investors were either very, very incorrect or outright highly inaccurate. How can that be? It can be because they're not experienced. What they do is they talk a lot and they want to be heard and they want to be seen. And Facebook is their platform or whatever, Twitter, so on and so forth. And they get an outright charge from having people listen and see. Whether or not they take that advice doesn't matter to them. They just want to interject. The only reason I actually saw this exchange, so to speak, was because I was mentioned in it, my transactional funding, 5 times. And the 5 people that mentioned me had all used me for transactional funding and said how I had over 40 years experience. The transactions were magnificent, all that kind of great stuff. But yet these trolls kept coming back and saying, well, you don't have to pay for transactional funding, just do an assignment of contract. Well, the reason this whole chain started out was because the first investor found out he couldn't do an assignment of contract. It used to be for virtual wholesalers, they would assign their contract. The big shift has been to actually list the properties on the MLS. Now, the MLS has a policy that if you're not on title, you can't list the property. And usually agents will check that. However, there are a number of ways to legally get around it, so it has to be listed on the MLS by the investor who is not the owner of the property at the time. The other third of these people were wannabes asking how transactional funding worked and not getting accurate answers. This is not uncommon. Facebook is not the only source of misinformation. I see it consistently on YouTube. I don't watch a lot of YouTube videos. Frankly, I don't have time. I should be making more YouTube videos, but it gets very frustrating when I see new investors decide, well, I did a deal and maybe I did 10 deals and now I'm a pro. And whatever worked for them in their 10 deals suddenly doesn't work. But for the people watching a video that it impacts emotionally and psychologically, they believe. I mean, look, it's on the internet. You can't lie if you're on the internet. So my question is, who's telling the truth? And who knows if they're simply uninformed or outright lying? Because some of the most experienced investors that I see with continuing YouTube videos saying, I do this for free, I don't get paid anything, but oh, by the way, if you're serious about doing this, I have a little program for you. And I heard recently that one of them's offering transactional funding for 4 points. 4 points. But if you're in his system, he might cut that down to less. I've been offering transactional funding for 1%. I set the standard in the industry years ago. But these people are professional video makers, and they admit that. My question is, are they really simply uninformed in some of the nitty-gritty about what they're talking about? Have they never done the deals? Or are they outright lying to scare people? And one of the places that I see it happening the most, and on the Facebook feed, the question was, it started out as, can you still wholesale in North Carolina? And what I see some of the gurus on YouTube doing is saying you can't wholesale in North Carolina anymore. Oh, by the way, you have to come to me and get transactional funding to do double closings. So you can wholesale, but you can't do it the way you did. And one of those feeds, there was a woman on there that sounded like she was an attorney. And if she was, she probably should have been disbarred. But she was saying, oh yes, you can wholesale, but you have to do this and that and this and that. If you don't do that, you can go to jail. That's not true. But yet it's on the internet or it's on Facebook and people believe it. So be careful about who you're listening to and whether they can be trusted. I've been getting a lot of requests for more information about Section 4 in our power wholesaling program that we started 4 months ago. This is the 4th month and we're delivering the 4th section. 4th section is very simply on scaling your business. It specifically discusses how to use VAs to begin with, but more importantly, it goes on to discuss 9 specific ways to scale your business. And this is not about simply adding VAs and then sitting back and hoping for the best. I remember one new student literally came to the Quick Start with us and so on. The next week, he decided, I'm going to hire VAs. They can do everything for me. And I actually have a list in the material about what they can do for you. They can do a lot for you. As you become more confident in their ability, they can run your business for you, including your bank account. And a lot of my students actually have VAs they've had long-term relationships with where it's that strong. But what he did was very simple. He hired 5 VAs the first week, and the second week he hired 5 more. And by the 4th week, he had fired all of them and lost a lot of money. So if you're going to get into hiring VAs, decide what you want to do. First of all, most people do what they don't want to do themselves, for example, cold calling. So I would say 80% of the VAs that you hear about or see are doing cold calling. How well do they do that? Well, that depends. Depends on how long they've been in the business, how much you're paying them, and what their best interest is. And I'm not going to get into that about VAs at this time and juncture because it's too extensive. These 9 specific ways that I mentioned are not about having vast experience to double, triple, or quadruple your number of deals. They are very specific ways for you to look at your business, how to either add to what you're doing or to change what you're doing. Because what I didn't realize as I did them is at least 7 of these can be tactics that can be used by new investors. When I say new investors, oh, by the way, you have to learn how to write a contract, which you should do within a day or two. But you have to have a few things in place, like a CRM, clauses in your contracts and stuff like that. But for most people, I say this and they don't get it. But if I can get a student to close 2 transactions, he's off and running or she's off and running, then they can scale and they can scale magnificently. So be wary if you're new and you've only done a deal or 2, can you scale? You can, but don't think that the VAs are your simple answer to scaling. So let's talk about back to basics, the thing that we were going to talk about first, and I've taken a little time to do this because I think the first part was important. So the first step in the 8-step process of a wholesale transaction is find motivated sellers. I mean, gee whiz, what can go wrong with this? Well, first of all, besides listed deals, prospect for realtors who have investors for buyers. They're out there. Very oftentimes they're hybrids. They actually are investors themselves. Now, there's an axiom on the YouTube videos that I see all the time. There's no deals on the MLS. That's absolutely untrue. Remember, the people that list their property on the MLS are there because they're trying to sell it. So you have somewhat a lukewarm to very motivated seller, and it's only a matter of making offers, being rejected, following up, putting them under contract, and selling them. Stacked filters, the most important source of motivated seller leads you can have. You need at least 3 to 4 filters for every one of your templates, so to speak. Non-owner occupied, vacant, pre-foreclosure, pre-tax deed sale, probates, divorce, bankruptcy, on and on and on. Don't stack more than 3 or 4 of those into one of your filters. Otherwise, you can have no prospects. You've eliminated all of them. DREIA has the ability for users to create these templates of stacked filters. One of my students, brilliantly bright, decided he was having trouble getting motivated sellers, so he was going to stack the filters. He came to me and he said, I stacked 23 filters into this particular template. I said, gee, how'd that work for you? He said, well, in Broward County, there's only one pre-foreclosure. At the time, there were thousands. So you can put yourself out of the game by overthinking it. Again, don't stack too many parameters. You lose viable prospects. Hybrid, these are pocket listings. What's a hybrid? I mentioned to you before. You need to prospect for listing agents who are wannabe investors who have pocket listings. They know they can make more money. They just don't know how to make it as an investor, or they think it's illegal, unfortunately. And that myth is perpetrated by their brokers, as well as the Board of Realtors, as well as the National Association of Realtors. Why? Because they don't want to be bothered. Everybody up the line is making money on the poor, hardworking agent at the bottom. The very savvy brokers have turned their agencies, their brokerages, into hybrid brokerages. How do you prospect for them? Call them and ask them. Let's talk about artificial intelligence. I got a call from an investor who said, would you talk to my dad? And I said, why? And she said, he's got so many leads, so many motivated seller leads, he can't handle them. What's the story? Well, he's actually a contractor, builds houses, and he decided he wanted to be a wholesaler at the beginning of this year. That's 11 months ago now. And he's got 3 guys working on computers that are using artificial intelligence to generate these leads. Okay. I've heard this for a long time, years as a matter of fact, about artificial intelligence, how it scans everything you can think of. One guy that was doing virtual wholesaling with me, and I was closing his transactions, said to me that he could tell 4 years in advance when somebody was going to get into financial trouble. 3 years in advance, 2 years. At 1 year, he would start prospecting for them, and he had multitude of deals, too many to follow up on. He went out of business. And he went out of business because he overpaid for deals. They're virtual deals, couldn't sell them, so on and so forth. So as I talked to him, here's an investor who has done a couple of wholesale deals. And I'm trying to talk to him and say, here's what I would suggest. And he's telling me, and I know you've been in the business a long time, but here's what I do. So I finally said to him, okay, using your artificial intelligence, which I'll tell you what it is. It's a program that looks at Zillow or Realtor.com pictures online, uses the AI to see if it can tell if the property is abandoned. So effectively, it's an artificial intelligence that does driving for dollars. Okay, if you've looked at enough houses online, some of those have nothing but trees in the front yard, and you can't even see the house. So I don't know. So he's on and on and on about how great it works. But he has all these leads. He doesn't know what to do. So I said, wait a minute. How many deals have you actually closed? You've been running this thing for 11 months now. He said, well, big pause, 2. But one of them, we couldn't sell it, so I went ahead and I rehabbed it. But I did good on it. I made $30,000. That's good for a rehab on a $300,000 property? Not so. So what I finally said to him was, we're not on the same wavelength. I can't communicate with you because you're not listening. And that's true with a lot of people I try and talk to. They have something set in their mind. They're absolutely determined to get that answer. And if they don't get that answer, they go to the next person who's going to deliver the answer to them. What I'm saying to you is simple. If you're going to be in this business, you have to be open-minded. And the thing I would say to you that's most relevant about talking to other people, always remember, sellers are liars and buyers are liars. And as soon as you understand and believe that, your life is going to get a lot easier. In the materials, I talk about over 175 what I call traditional ways to find motivated sellers before they come up on every other investor's radar. How can you do that? Those are the traditional things that we've done for many, many years that work. I'm not going to get into them here because I'd spend the whole evening on them, but they're there for you and you should be using them. Besides doing whatever you're doing, you can have other people do things for you if you don't want to do them yourself. So what everybody's looking for is the silver bullet to find motivated sellers. I'm sure they spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year buying courses to get fancy about silver bullets, wholesaling, lease options, doing this, doing that, jumping up and down, very complicated legal maneuvers. The bottom line is the people who make the most money are the people selling the course on those. What you have to do is stick to the basics, make money. Once you're making money and you understand how to do it, then you should become creative. Not try and become creative before you even get started. Step 2 is property evaluation. That's easy. Oh, except that the market's crazy. So I'm going to mention tax assessed value. People don't realize this, but the appraiser for the county actually does appraisals, typically every 2 to 3 or 4 years, depending on the county and the activity of the market and so on. So that tax assessed value can be a good guideline. It's actually a very good guideline for raw land, unless it's going to be developed by a developer. And the transaction I mentioned to you earlier, $798,000 turning into $1.8 million, is exactly that. Multiple acreage that's going to become a development. So what percentage of tax assessed value should you be paying? I only want you to look at it to kind of follow where it is, because the market ran up quickly. I say quickly, it ran up over the last 2 years more than it should have because of artificial buying by homeowners that were moving from other areas, and the sale of their property produced big chunks of change, so to speak. So they came down, and instead of buying a mortgage like most people did, they started buying for cash. They started to run the markets. The hedge funds helped all that. The iBuyers added fuel to the fire. So we're in, frankly, an artificial market. Yesterday, one of my students said to me, she's selling one of her properties, and I said, great, what'd you get for it? She said, 270. I said, what'd you pay for it? Because she bought it a few years ago. She said, I paid $30,000. Now, I suggest that in the last 2 years, had she tried to sell it, she would have gotten maybe 270. So that's an affordable mortgage for the person that bought it. But is it going to be affordable if he or his wife or the siblings or whomever is working in the house? It's going to come back on the market. So tax assessed value is one guideline only. It's especially good with raw land because you can make a case to the seller of what the property is appraised for. You can get an appraisal, and my question on the appraisal is the appraiser going to buy it for that price, or is he just going to give you the highest comps in the neighborhood? What you have to remember is the appraiser's limit of liability is only what he had charged for the appraisal. And I have to say that they are professionals. They go through courses and continuing ed credits. They know their job, but the reality is that's what the value should be in a normal market. Are we in a normal market? I don't know. But when it starts to fall, it's then not going to be a normal market. So it's not feasible for you to pay for an appraisal for a property that you're going to make an offer on. BPO and CMA, these are smoke and mirrors. Broker's price opinion simply looks at the highest comps, oftentimes not comparable sales, just to generate a value. And CMA is even worse because it takes into account properties that are listed and not selling. These are both done by realtors. Data suppliers market value. And data suppliers, I mean any supplier of data, REIA for example, or national suppliers. They create a market value, and it's based on the same parameters typically that the appraiser uses. That's typically a half mile out from the property or a mile out, plus or minus 10% of the square footage, on and on and on. So how good is that value? It's as good as you need it. So how can you beat out your competition? This is what's important. Your competition is looking at some combination of these, typically the data supplier's market value. He could be looking at something as simple as Zillow.com to see what they say. Just make the offer. That's the bottom line. By the time you spend figuring out what the house next door looks like and the house down the block and it's not the same neighborhood, you're wasting your time. Just make the offer. And if you say to me, well, what if I'm wrong? You have to be wrong. If your offer is accepted, then you're wrong. If your offer is not accepted, we're going to talk about that in a minute. If the seller is motivated, the price is not a consideration. The video that I mentioned with Aaron on the very first slide that I showed you, he talks about his seller saying to him, I just want to get rid of the property. It's a nuisance. I don't care about the price. That's a motivated seller. And it's not because, in this case, the house was going to be condemned because it was in such bad shape. That doesn't matter. That seller is motivated for a convenience reason. She wants to simply get out. If you haven't come to the last couple of meetings, I talked about scaling your business, and one of those 9 ways is the exact method that a hybrid wholesaler realtor uses to close, listen now, over 20 deals every day. 20 deals every day, not weekly, not monthly, not annually, every day. How does he do that? I go into details, exactly what to say to get people to come to you versus your competition. Follow-up is where the money is always. And I can't stress that enough. I've already said sometimes they come back months later, sometimes years later. Only one of two things can happen. Somebody else pays too much money, or you're the last man or woman standing when this motivated seller is tired of going on and on and on and having problems with the property. Step 3, make your offers. Well, everything sells above list. No reason to make offers. I'm not going to get anything. Well, first of all, you need to figure out what contract you're working with. Are you working with a FAR bar? No, I'm not licensed. I can't use the FAR bar. You can lease it even though you're not licensed. It's slightly different than the realtor's contract, but it is put out by the board of realtors who collects the revenue for the leases. Or you can use your homemade contract. The FAR bar is professional level when you go in there. The homemade contract is, God bless you, whatever you make it to be. The simpler the contract on your homemade contract, the fewer the pages, the greater your liability and ultimate potential loss for the deal. If you're dealing with a homeowner, it's very simple. You can't use that contract with a realtor. They'll laugh at you. You can't use a letter of intent. So that's the first thing you have to do is get your contracting under control. What about clauses? The most important ones are very simple. Earnest money deposit. Well, gee whiz, that's a problem. I don't have any money. Okay, there's 3 ways to overcome the earnest money deposit that you don't have, one of which is in your contracting. What about the closing date? Well, the closing date's critical because if you're doing wholesaling, you have to make sure that your end buyer is going to close on the same day. So you have to pick the closing date. What about the inspection period? This is the savior of your entire contract because if you can't sell it during your inspection period, you risk losing your earnest money deposit. Now that's the limit of your liability in the FAR bar contract, for example. I don't know what's in your homemade contract. So people say, well, I'm afraid of being sued. Well, in fact, the FAR bar contract has you go to mediation. And again, your limit of liability is really your earnest money deposit. What about extended liability? This is a very, very unique situation. I started doing it years ago, and I don't know of anyone else in the industry that does it. It simply means if your end buyer or your seller don't come to closing, they owe you money. I'm not talking about your end buyer's earnest money deposit. I'm talking about an extended liability. So if you're using a FAR bar contract, not going to happen. If you're using a homemade contract, it's not going to happen unless you understand the principle and you put it into your contract and your end buyer signs it. What about defaults? Well, unfortunately, in what I see, because I see hundreds and hundreds of closing, fully 38% don't close. Could be higher in some cases. Why? Very simple. Buyer or seller don't come to closing. I'm not going to get into those reasons, but there's 20 reasons why buyers and sellers don't come to closing. I put them into a little book and talk about an insight into each one. By the way, what can you do about it? How can you drag a seller or an end buyer back to the closing table when they don't want to come? If you look on YouTube videos, some of the gurus will say, hey, you file notice of interest. Question is, do they work? 98% of the time they don't because they're done incorrectly. In the materials that I have, I talk about a Thor's hammer, filing a lis penance against the property so it cannot be sold. And to this day, I still have attorneys that say you can't file lis penance. And yet we go and file lis penance, we bring the sellers back to closing, so on and so forth. So if you ask people, can you do it? They're going to say no, and that's fine because they don't know how to do it. And I've had attorneys try it. And what they've done is they put the lis penance against the property as a contractor's lien. It turned out that my student had that property under contract and was selling it. The investor defaulted, and he put a notice of interest on it. So we couldn't resell it until we did a couple of things, but we literally had that notice of interest knocked off within 5 minutes when the judge saw it. Seller responses. You've gotten to the point where you found motivated sellers, you made offers, now what about the responses? They say my offers are too low. No is the best possible answer you can get because you haven't overpaid for it. Now, if you're saying to me, well, the seller said it was okay and I got a great price, there's no question. In your mind, you got a great price. I literally hear this almost every day, and sometimes many times in the same day, where an investor will come to me for transactional funding and say, here's one 2 days ago, it's worth 350 all day long. I got it for 185. I said, great. How much work does it need? Oh, it needs some work, but probably 30,000. So I'm thinking 30,000, 185. It's got to be worth somewhere in the 250, 270 range. And I said to him, what do you need funding for? He said, well, I sold it already. And I said, for what? 203,000. I said, 203? Yeah, that's all my buyer would pay. I said to him, how many buyers do you have? He said, well, I have 3 full time. That guy is just going to wind up making 100 grand on that investor. And I said to him, I've told you literally for a long time to build your buyers list. He said, look, I've been a full-time investor for 7 years. I said, okay, how much is the most you made any one year? He said, well, 1 year I made 70 grand. If you're an investor for 7 years and you're making only 70 grand, you have to step up your game. The first thing of which is to build a bigger buyers list. And he said to me, I follow, I'm not going to say the guy's name on YouTube, and I do whatever he tells me. And I said, great. Then ask him next time you go to the closing and you come begging to me to tell you how to get it closed. Call him, see what he has to say about it. And I say this not begrudgingly. Those guys are very masterful at doing YouTube videos and talking about what they do. I don't know. Sometimes I say to myself, I don't believe it because I know it can't be done. Okay, so what happens is you get an answer back. Okay, you got it. Congratulations. That's what usually comes through with a listing agent. Something's wrong. Now remember, you got an inspection period, so you can sit back and say, uh-oh, what have I done? And sometimes the property itself, the structure, has been demolished. And what it didn't say on the small print that you didn't read on the MLS in the remarks was, oh yeah, the property, you're buying raw land. And you owe the city a lien because it's a hard cost to demolish the house that you're no longer buying. So figure out what's wrong. Now, that shouldn't preclude you from doing the deal because you're not at the closing table yet. Creative financing. Again, gurus are coming back and they're going into this thing about buy my course. I'll show you how to buy these houses, no money, creative financing. And I see them every once in a while where an investor did a lease option on a property. Now, 2 years later, he comes to the closing table and his tenant, who was supposed to be the end buyer, can't get financing. He's got a substantial profit in the property itself. So he's asking me to buy it because he found somebody to wholesale it to. And I say, okay, same day, double closing, I got you. Except one thing, the seller won't sell to him. And the seller signed up an attorney who said, my client had dementia. They didn't understand what they did when they signed that. Therefore, your contract's invalid. We're not going to give you anything. And by the way, you didn't honor the lease. You haven't made any payments. Therefore, we're evicting you besides. Even though he doesn't live in it, they're canceling the contract based on that. I want to say this to you. Low-hanging fruit, the simplest thing you can do is to wholesale. Learn how to purchase, learn how to sell, and later you can do creative financing and strange things because you have time to do it. What type of offer? Cash terms or options. Now, why do I say options? And the reason is, in very large parcels of land, for example, you can go into the seller and say, I understand you want way over market value, and I'm willing to pay that. But I'm going to give you an option because I have to get my funding sources in order. I'll pay you that ridiculous amount. Now, how much should your non-refundable option consideration be? As little as possible, $100. The seller says, are you stupid? You're trying to tie up an $800,000 profit for $100? And your response could be, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you $850. But I never put up more than $100 because either I'm going to do it or not. There you go. So what happens? You're going to get it under contract. And if you've done your homework, you've already looked for somebody who is looking for a parcel of land to build on in that area or whatever else you're doing the option on. Cash, you know what it is. That's king. Now, if you have a proof of funds that's not yours, you went online, you saw them for free, you got them, the agent says it has to have your name and address on the proof of funds. Okay, that eliminates 99% of the investors out there. But there's options to overcome that. If you go online on my videos and watch what I'm telling you, you'll see exactly how to get your name on the statement legally and open the world to you in terms of being able to have cash offers that are reflective of the value you bring to the table, so to speak. Now, when you go to the table, where's the cash? It's your funding partner. Transactional funding is what it's called. So what about terms? Very oftentimes, investors or students will call and say, it's free and clear. Okay, so make a terms offer. By the way, Mr. Seller, what are you going to do with the money when we close? Well, I'm going to put it in a CD and get 2%. I have these scripts for you. I have everything you need. The answer is very simply, why don't you invest in the same thing the bank invests in and make more money, like 6%? How can I make 6%? Because the bank puts your money in the mortgages. I'll give you a mortgage on the property short term. I'm not going to have it very long, but I'll give you 6% paid monthly or 8% annually. Can you do creative financing? Can you do terms offers? Yes, but remember the market we're in. It has to be conducive to the seller to make a lot of sense. You're looking for motivated sellers, not people that want full market value, unless that's the route you want to try and take. How about multifamily offers? There is a giant trend of long-term multifamily property owners coming out of the properties, especially apartment complexes. They're not listing them. They're going to local brokers and saying, I don't want it on the MLS. You go out to your base, first one here with a buyer does it. They're based on cap rate. Do not believe the cap rate that's advertised. I have a form for you called a rental return calculator that calculates cap rates. It's almost instantaneous. And if you're thinking about buying multifamily properties, remember you need cash to buy or loans. And if you don't have very good credit, 15 or 20% down on the purchase, the only thing you're going to do with multifamily properties is to wholesale them. Step 5, follow-up. Why bother when everything sells so fast? These are in red the excuses I get all the time. Well, follow-up is where 85% of all deals come from. The other 15% come when you make the offer, you get it accepted right away. And out of those, many of those fail. Certainly over 50 to 60%. Why? You've offered too much. You can't resell it. So my question is, why not you? There's no answer for that from you except an excuse of why you can't do something. In the first slide, you saw Aaron, who wanted to do something so badly to get into real estate investing that he sold his house. He literally said to me in the interview, I was facing homelessness. Okay, that's a big commitment. I don't expect everyone listening to go out, sell their house, and start becoming a real estate investor. But don't come up with the excuses like why bother when everything sells so fast, because everything is selling, and the guys who are buying the fast and highest prices are not going to be in the market for very long. Well, what about the follow-up? How often after being rejected? Well, frankly, until the property sells or you get it under contract, those are the only two things that can happen. In my mentoring class, typically, and some of the DREIA meetings, I've said, until they get a restraining order, keep following up. Everybody laughs and chuckles, and the reality is that's true. The more you follow up, one of two things is going to happen. It's going to sell or you get it under contract. If you make offers on listed properties, you must follow up the same day by phone. Not emails, not text. And if you say, I can't talk to those people, they're hard to deal with, well, that's your problem. Hire a VA to do it for you. The reason to follow up, what most people don't understand, is not to find out that your offer was stupid low and rejected. That's not the reason to follow up. There's 3 reasons to follow up. 2 of those are much more important than even making the offer. Find buyers. Without deals, why would I bother? Well, building your buyers list is the most important thing that you can do, including looking for motivated sellers. I remember all too well that one of the most successful wholesalers, that's a student of mine, he came to a seminar and I talked about building a buyers list, and he said, you changed my life. And what he did is he built a gigantic buyers list and continues to build it every day. Every day. Thousands and thousands of buyers. What happened? He doesn't have to look for properties. Everybody comes to him. No earnest money deposit, no out there scratching the sidewalk trying to figure out who's motivated and who's not. But he has the biggest buyers list along with 2 or 3 other wholesalers. Combined, they do many of the wholesale deals. Now, is that good or bad? Depends on how good your deal is, how good you're at negotiating, and how badly he thinks he can resell it. It has happened to us before. We've had an investor student get a deal, sell it, come in with what we consider an unusually small profit, $10,000, and one of the wholesalers that bought it resells it, and he resold it for a $40,000 profit, 4 times what our student made. Now, how did that happen? The wholesaler that sold it for a $40,000 profit had a bigger buyer's list. It's very, very simple. Now, qualified buyers are ones that actually bought properties, not other wannabe investors running around trading cards and stuff. Wannabes are the real deal killers who want to wholesale your deal to their crappy or non-existent list. So they put it under contract. They tell you, cash buyer, it's all I do. They've never done it before. So how do you qualify them? Ask them for a proof of funds before you sign a contract with them. And more importantly, make sure you get their earnest money deposit, because if you don't, they haven't anything to lose unless you use the contract that has extended liability. Recycle other wholesalers' lost deals and the buyers of their successful deals. You can get on everybody's wholesale list. Start tracking, and the VA can do this for you. Set up a spreadsheet, 123 Main Street. It's offered by investor A. Oh yeah, it's by B and C and D and E also. Why? They use each other's properties to put out on their list because they have different buyers. But what happened to the property? Over a third of the time, they don't close. That gives you the opportunity to go back to the seller. But on the 2/3 of the time they do close, you can then go back to their buyer because you know it's a cash buyer, you know it's for wholesale deals. Ask realtors, do you have cash buyers for your wholesale deals? And if they say that's illegal, you can't do that, go on to the next one. And keep going on until you find some that have sanity and understand what investing is about. I can't say this enough. Beware of black hat wholesalers. They are all around you. And the most vocal ones of the black hat wholesalers are the ones who then have deals stolen from them. It's like it's okay if I go out and steal deals, but if you come along and try and steal a deal or do from me, I'm going to take you to the Supreme Court. Is black hat wholesaling illegal? It is. Can it be prosecuted? It can be. Should you worry about it? If you're doing it, maybe. Depends on who you're doing it against. Step 7, advertise. I get these comments about I have 8 buyers. Is that enough? No. 80? No. 800? Barely. Remember, only about 10% of your buyers list is either capable or ready to buy when you put a property out. So 800 translates back into maybe 70, 80, maybe 90 buyers who have the cash and are willing to look at it at that time. Out of those 80, let's say, some of those won't have the ability to do it at that time because they're rehabbers in most cases. They don't have the crews to do it, don't want to tie up hard money and wait for it. So build a giant buyers list. Advertise your property. Determine an exit strategy. Well, what are the exit strategies? I mean, how many can there be? There's only 3. We're going to look at them in a second. Target your deal to the prospects. It should be buyers. Again, 3 exit strategies. Other wholesalers, rehabbers, the best buyers because they need the deals, are landlords. Those have to be multifamily properties. I've said this numerous times before. If you haven't heard it, I'll say it again. Nancy and I have owned over 1,000 doors, landlord rental doors, never collected 1 day's worth of rent. Why? We wholesaled all of them. And if you look at my information online or in the program, we typically took out between 2.5 and 3.5 years of net income that the landlord buyer had to struggle to get. And the average landlord lasts 3.5 years. So one of the templates that we created on REIFax is what we call tired landlords. Those are the guys that have owned the property for 3.5 or 4 years or more. You can set that parameter yourself. One bad tenant can change a landlord's mind forever. Make sure you can legally advertise your deal, and this is critically important because a lot of guys out there will look at your deal and ask you if you own the contract. That's what they should be doing. That means you signed a contract with the original seller. If you haven't signed a contract yet because you want to market it first to see what you get, you're going to be in trouble. Department of Business and Professional Regulations, DBPR, will be alerted to you. They will come after you. They will fine you. It's not a huge fine. You can live through the fine. What you're going to have to not be able to live through is the letter you sign as a consent, never to do it again, and God knows what happens to you if you do. So make sure you have an equitable interest in the property by having a signed contract from the original seller or a JV agreement with the person you're remarketing it from. Why not just list it on the MLS? Well, again, I mentioned this before. MLS requires certain things like, hey, you have to be on title. There are exceptions. And there are ways to list it on the MLS. I'm not going to go through it here because you guys will run out there, try and do it, screw it up, and come back and say, Dave, it didn't work. It didn't work because you didn't work it right. But there are exceptions. You can find them out and you can get it listed. But one thing I'll mention to you is if you have a seller and you list the property, typically what happens is everyone around that seller looks on the MLS just because they're looking to see their net worth, what's happening in the neighborhood. They see that Joe's selling his house in the MLS. They call up Joe and say, Joe, I see you're selling your house for $300,000. I think you get more than that. Joe says, I sold my house already to investor A for $220,000 for cash. What are you talking about? That's going to be a little bit of a problem. Because did Joe authorize you to do it? If you don't have it in writing, he didn't do it. So be careful what you're assuming and what you take for granted. You should have an emergency sales kit. Predominantly one of the things is bandit signs. Build your list of other trusted investors. And I say trusted investors because not all investors are to be trusted, especially wholesalers. It's a small community. And what I call the moccasin mouth, when you get burned, be careful of libeling other people. You better have backup for your reasons for the libelous comments that you're making if you're out there running around telling people that. Your best deal is just not to do anything with those people. Step 8, go to closing. I mentioned it before, 38% of closings fail. Why? Well, actually, if you're a new investor, it could be much higher. First of all, you have to understand how a closing works before you have to learn by accident. That's pretty simple. Do your homework beforehand. Check out some closing statements so you understand the charges and credits due, both to you and your seller or your buyer. I have tons of videos online, and I go through closing statements line item by line item. And if you say to me, Dave, I don't want to be bothered with this stuff, that's why I have the closing agent. I would say to you that every day I review anywhere between 1 and 7 closing statements. I would say that 40% of them, at least, have errors. Now, I don't look at every line item, but the line items I look at have those errors. And who pays for that? You, the investor. Those errors are never in favor of the seller. It's always the investor that takes the hit for it. So do some research, learn what you got to do. Specifically stipulate who pays for what on your purchase and sale agreements. Very oftentimes an investor will come in and he says, I got a $10,000 profit. Okay, what's your purchase price? $300. What's your sales price? $310. You don't have a $10,000 profit unless you can assign the contract. If you have to double close, if you're lucky, you're going to make $1,500 on that transaction. An assignment's a very viable option if your spread's very small. The reason you wouldn't be able to assign is the seller specifically says, I'm selling it to you. I want you to close on it. You cannot assign it. The closing agent may say to you, we don't do assignments. The state may say to you, you can't do assignments. You have to bring the money to closing. And your end buyer may say, gee, you made a huge profit. I'm here at the closing table, but I'm not going to pay you that. Here's the most I'll pay. At the same time, because of the assignment, the seller says, look at how much money you're making. You know, you scammed me. I should have been paid more. Seller and buyer, or both of them, walk away. And this is what I was just talking about, stopping buyer and seller defaults ahead of the closing. There's 20 reasons I mentioned to you before why buyer and sellers default. You can stop most every one of those, and in almost every case you can bring them back to the closing table. I use an example in there of a REO that I put under contract, wholesaled it. The listing agent told the asset manager that I had wholesaled the property for $25,000 more than I had it under contract for with them. And the asset manager said, cancel the contract. Listing agent came back to me and said, I'm canceling the contract. I said, you can't cancel the contract. She said, it's not me. It's the seller. I said, he can't cancel the contract. She said, oh, yes, he can. He's one of the top 5 banks in the United States, one of the top 10 in the world. He has more attorneys than you've ever seen in your life. I said, he can't cancel the contract. She said, yes, he can. So I did my Thor's hammer, what I talked to you before about, and 48 hours later, I'm going to say kicking and screaming, he called the agent and said, we're going to close on Friday. How did I do that? I mentioned it before. I mentioned it in the book, a whole thing like that. But these things can be done. Most closing agents and most attorneys have a narrow view of how things are done, and they don't deviate. Why? They don't have to. They just take the business that fits in the mold. And typically that mold is realtors. Realtors have their blinkers on. Everybody has their blinkers or blinders on, except the investor who has to come in there and wade in the muck to be able to make the deal work. It's very important you understand deed restrictions versus a seasoning period. Deed restriction is put on there by the seller Whereas a seasoning period happens only after you've bought the property and you're going to resell it, and an end buyer comes in with financing. And his lender says, you know, you've only owned it for 2 days. We're not going to finance that. You marked it up $90,000. What'd you do for repairs in 24 hours? That's the seasoning period. In my final statement, and this is where your big profits can be scaled, never go to closing without asking at least 3 times for a repair credit on the HUD, and the seller or buyer just can't cancel your contract. So don't be afraid of them coming back and say, I'm canceling. You can't. You have a liability. You have a contract. That's what the contract is for. Now, why do I say a repair credit? It feels much better than a price reduction. Also, if it's a listed property, the realtor gets his commission on the repair credit amount, where he does not get a commission on a price reduction. So I'm Dave Dinkle. I wish you limitless success in all you do, and hopefully I'll see you at the next meeting.
Dave?
I'm here. I can't get off my screen, but it's okay.
It's okay.
Oh, I know what I got to do. Here you go. Bijou, you got some last comments or anything?
No, please mark your calendar for January 19th. It's going to be an awesome event. Live at the Miami Shores Country Club. And happy Thanksgiving next week. Be safe. And thank you for joining us. Dave, last words?
Yeah, guys, if you're not making offers, you're not going to be doing deals. If you're not making offers and don't know how to do it, then you need some help. But I wish all of you limitless success in everything you do. So go for it. And happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Good night.